live from Spitalfield in London. I'm Natalie. I'll just give it a minute until I can see that you guys are in the chat. If you are live with us, welcome. If you're watching this on replay in the next few weeks or days or whenever you're watching this, if you wanted to skip the hellos, feel free to skip the next 10 minutes. We're just waiting here for everyone to connect. Let me know in the chat that you can hear me properly. So we've got about 10 minutes to start, 10 minutes before we officially kick off. Thank you, Tish. Thank you. Most of you know the drill already. We're going to have to test the microphone. Hi, Caroline. Hi, Shas. Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to tap, see, I've got the microphone over here. I'm going to tap it 3 times. Let me know in the chat that you've heard the tapping. You should have heard 3 little taps. If you've not heard it, that my microphone could be disconnected somehow. So let me know. Hi, Mark. Hi, Diane. And welcome, Sandrine. Nice to see you all here, guys. And welcome everyone that I've already greeted in the chat. You heard it faintly, right? Okay, let me just double check. Hold on, I'm gonna have to drop you down. 1 second. I'm gonna play. Right, cool. We are now on the floor. I'm gonna tap it again. It should be a nice, loud tap. And let's gracefully go back up. Let me know. Hi, Danette, and welcome everyone that just joined. We are live from London, live from Spitalfield. It is nearly 9:30 p.m. and it is 29th of October. You've heard it perfect. Thank you, Marilyn. Thanks, everyone. If at any point through the tour you start to hear some funny noises or wind noises or whatever, let me know, because the microphone can easily get disconnected. You might have noticed you don't see the Prism logo tonight down the corner because I'm streaming straight through YouTube, which is fine. We know now that it works well. The little downside is that for me, the messages in the chat, they disappear fairly quickly. So obviously this is interactive as usual, but if you have any interesting questions and I miss them, don't be shy, ask again, because they disappear fairly quickly, and I'm dyslexic, so I'm actually a slow reader. So yeah, don't be shy if I've missed them, just go again. So we still have a few minutes before to go. We're just waiting for everyone. And some of you were with me last night in my premiere. I did tell you I was going to explain the hypes on YouTube. Now, the hypes, hi Jenny, and welcome everyone else that just joined. The hypes, it's a new feature on YouTube in 39 countries. So it might not be in yours, but it is in Canada, in the US, in the UK, in France, in Turkey, in Brazil. Not through the live and not through the premieres, but after that, if you're watching the replay on a phone, you should have the option, to give a like or a comment. Next to that, there should be a little button for hypes. It's a new feature to help young creators to compete in a way. On YouTube today, we are competing with huge productions like TV channels or Piers Morgan or whatever it might be. So it's a new little feature that is going to help us get some visibility, really. I don't have high hopes, but basically, if you give me some hypes, the video could get some visibility on the hype feature page. I don't think anyone is going to be checking that page, but good try, YouTube. So you can give 3 hypes a week to small-ish creators. So if you do see that button, do hit the hype button. That always helps. Now you won't hear me begging for hypes because, to be honest, a tip, as little as it might be, is always much more helpful to me than a hype. But if you wanna help for free, do hit that hype button if you happen to see it. It's not gonna be visible through the live. It's for people watching the replay later on. Thanks, Shaz. I don't know if it's Shaz or Shaz. I always say Shaz, but I don't know. You don't have the hype. I think it might not be visible on the computers yet. I think eventually what they want to do, they're already testing the paying hypes in Brazil and Turkey. I think eventually it's going to become like a super chat. You're going to be able to leave a little hypey tip that will promote the video as well as pay, but we're not there yet. I think it's very much a trying period, and anyway, for now in the UK, in the US, in Canada, in India, it's all free anyway. And let's see what time it is. We've got about 7 minutes. 7 minutes before we officially kick off. So if any of you were completely new to me in the chat, do let us know. It's always great to see a few new names. Don't be shy. So we are in Spitalfield. Oh, thank you, Bizbutts. Thanks ever so much. Oh, and I actually see the cheerleader lemon, pear, whatever fruit that was, cheerleader lime. I actually see it. Remember on Prism, I couldn't actually see the little dancing emojis. I could see the tip, I couldn't actually have the emojis. So that's one of the benefits of streaming straight through YouTube without using a third party. Although it's completely covering the screen for a sec, so if I was framing people, I probably wouldn't see them as well. Yeah, they start. Well, there's a lot of new changes coming into YouTube in the next few months. I think they had an event somewhere in the US called Made on YouTube, where they announced all the new features. Some of them are going to be like wild in terms of AI and stuff like that. Some of them I'm not interested in. But it does look like they finally realized the power of the lives. I think they're going to give the lives a bit more visibility, so that's great for us. Although the lives are risky because they need to trust the creator, because anything could happen. Some of you might have seen in the news what happened in France 2 months ago. A tragic case of a guy that was basically killed live. It was an 11-day live on a different platform. It's a platform called Kick. It's an Australian platform. But yeah, I'm not going to tell you the story because it's not the case. It's not tonight's story. But a horrible case of a gentleman that might have suffered from some kind of disabilities, that was abused by his mate. He was up for it. I mean, it was one of those mad lives where people are a bit like, I don't know, sadic to an extent, and anyway, there's a guy that died live, so I think that's why some platforms are very careful with the lives they feature, because of course they wouldn't have time to stop it if anyway, I don't want to tell you the story, it's very dark, but if you wanted to Google him, his name is Raphael something, that's his real name, but his live streaming name was Jean Pornmanov, something like that. Horrible case. Right, what time is it? Let's see. We've got 3 minutes to go. 3 minutes. And some of you might know exactly where I am. I'm exactly at the border with the City of London. it's going to be fairly busy on the street tonight. There are a lot of in-person Jack the Ripper tours. I scheduled it a little bit later on because most of them they start about 7, but we might still run into a few. Yeah, the chat, I do apologize. The chat is so quick that sometimes I'm not sure what you guys are talking about. But hey ho, if I've missed anything interesting, you'll tell me again. I will still be using Prism every so often. You know, when I want to show you pictures of videos in the live, it's actually still much better on Prism. Is it cold? No, it's not. It's not too cold at all. It's been raining all day, so I did hope for the best in terms of dryness, but it's not too cold. It's probably about 10 degrees Celsius, which is not bad for the season. Right, let's see what time it is. 2 minutes to go. 2 minutes. So if you get bored of my face, don't worry. We'll make a move in 2 minutes. Hi, Red Cloud. I've not actually seen you, but I see people saying hi, so you must be there. And welcome everyone else that I did not greet. Welcome everyone that just joined. Good to know, Tish. So we've got, let's see, 1 minute to go. So it is nearly 9:30 p.m. and it is the 29th of October, 2025. We never know. You could be watching this in 10 years from now. So it is here, 2025. And let's see, it should be time now. It is officially time to start. So welcome everyone. Without further ado, I'm gonna flip this camera around and let's go. Is that the one? Oh, yeah, it's the one. Okay. I'm not used to the buttons, they're a bit different on Prism. Anyway, let's go. We are here exactly at the border with the City of London. If you looked at the street sign up there, you might see Whitegate Street. Right above the street name, can I zoom in? Let's see, yes. Right above the street name here, you see the little crest. See this little St. George's cross on the little dragons? That is the crest of the City of London. If I zoom out, I'll show you the name on the other side. We're gonna go out of the city. We're going down on Artillery Passage over here. So that is outside of the City of London. It doesn't make a huge difference, but if I was to commit a little crime, or even just a little graffiti, if I did it through that side, I'll have to deal with the Met Police, the Metropolitan Police. If I did it down the other side, I'll have to deal with the City of London Police. Nowadays, the two police forces, they communicate very well, of course. But, you know, it was not always the case. And if you go down that side, that street down there, that's Bishopgate. When you see those gates, like Moorgate, Aldgate, Bishopgate, those were the gates into the City of London. Because when we say the City of London, we're talking about one of our 32 districts, the oldest one. What the Romans would have created on called Londinium. But tonight we're not going back into Roman times, we're going back into Victorian times. When I say Victorian times, we're talking about the latest part of the 19th century. London has changed quite a lot since Victorian times, but this little street over here, Artillery Passage, it's one of the only streets in London that really kept its Victorian atmosphere. So let's go and cross it. you'd have to imagine at the time a street like this would have been extremely busy. You'd have the butchers coming and chop the meat down the street, being very loud, trying to attract some customers. So they'll be chopping the meat with the pigeon dropping on everything. Let me try to go through. Sorry. And you would have had quite a few butchers around here because at the time there were a lot of slaughterhouses in Spitalfield. So many that actually, if you spot the man late at night with maybe a bit of blood on himself, you probably wouldn't be massively worried. He might have been working in an abattoir, in a slaughterhouse. Those Victorian shops, they were often very deep, like see this one here? People are going to be on camera. They were often very deep because when you turned up into a shop at the time, you'd have a counter and you'd have the workshop at the back. Let's say if you stepped into a pharmacy, you'd have a counter, and behind that they'll make the potions for you. They'll chop the herbs or whatever it might be. If you turned up into a clothing shop, you'll stop at the counter and they'll have a workshop behind. They'll take your measurements and they'll make the dress at the back. So very often they were quite deep, those shops. Now, if I tell you London in Victorian times, you probably imagine gentleman with a top hat and a cane and a beautiful like a cape, and you'd probably imagine ladies with tiny little waist and beautiful dresses and beautiful hats. Yes, in Westminster. Over here in the East End of London, you wouldn't have seen many gentlemen with the top hats. This side of the city was overly populated, extremely poor. We were quite close to the docks. London was a big port, so you'd have some people working as dockers, and you'd have a lot of prostitutions because ladies, they didn't have that many options, So the gentleman with the top hat, you probably wouldn't see him very often down here. Now, if he did come down here, you'd with his wife, with the beautiful dress, the wife would often be a bit closer to the wall and the gentleman more towards the middle, because at the time, we didn't have the public sewer down here yet, so you'd still have people dropping their chamber pots through the windows. And we have a few expressions that comes from there. You might have heard, in the UK, when we go to the toilets, when you go to the toilets, you go to the loo. We don't really call it the bathrooms or anything. We often call it the loo. It's because back in the day, people, before to drop their chamber pots through their windows, they used to shout, "Garde à l'eau, garde à l'eau." It's old French, but it means mind the water. Not exactly water, of course. We're talking literally human waste. And over the years, it became the loo, the loo. There's another expression that comes from there. Not very polite, but I might as well tell you. When you get a bit intoxicated, a bit drunk, you might say, "I'm shit-faced." Well, that is because people that were sober, when they heard the loo, they used to hide away. People that were drunk, sometimes they would look up and they would quite literally get, shit-faced. So yeah, there's another building that's beautiful here. This little, today it's an art gallery, but it's quite typical of those Georgian shops with the little windows and stuff. It looks a bit Harry Potterish, really. Now, did you guys read or see Oliver Twist? If you remember in Oliver Twist, at the beginning, he's in some kind of what might look like an orphanage, but it's not. It's a workhouse. The workhouses, they were those accommodations for the very poor. If really you could not feed your kids, you could not put a roof over your head, the last thing you could possibly do was to come to the workhouse. They would split the families because they did not want people to have a good time. So you'd have the part for the men, the part for the women. And you've read Oliver Twist, perfect. And so Oliver Twist was in the part for the child, for the children, because that split after the age of 7, you'd be in the part for the kids. Little disclaimer, the building I'm showing you now was not a workhouse. It was the Providence Row night shelter. It was run by Catholic nuns. But it functioned a bit the same. So you see up there it says woman. That's because that was the entrance for the ladies. And our 5th victim, the Jack the Ripper victim, Mary Kelly, she spent a bit of time in here apparently. There's a Catholic nun in the 80s that did a BBC interview, and she said she had heard an older nun that was there in 1888 that had said, oh, if it wasn't for the Kelly girl, none of this would have happened. So that's why some people are convinced that all those murders were actually linked to Mary Kelly. But anyway, we'll get back to that. For now, the workhouses in general, they were a type of places where you did not want to live. It was very rough. You'd queue over here, then you'd get in. They'll force you to bathe in like a barrel of water that 25 or 50 might have bathed in before you, and then you'd sleep in some kind of a wooden bed with another 20 in the same room with, tuberculosis and bed bugs and whatever it might be. So it would have been a hard place to live, but you did not want to die in there. Because what happened is, we talked about that in a few of my other tours, you might remember, we had at the beginning of the 19th century and on the 18th century as well, we had a huge demand for human bodies. It was really the beginning of medicine as we know it today. And there were a lot of dissections needed to train the new doctors. And at the time, the only bodies that were given to science were the bodies from the executions. There were some, but not enough. And luckily, kids were hardly ever executed, for example. Some have been, but luckily it was very, very, very rare, or pregnant ladies. So those bodies were very valuable. And we had a problem with body snatchers. Those people going to the cemeteries or the graveyards to steal those newly buried bodies to then sell them to the anatomist. And to stop the body snatchers, in 1832, the church decided that the people dying in those poorhouses, those workhouses, those prisons, their bodies would be given to science. So for them, it was exactly what they did not want. That was the worst possible thing that could happen to them. Because at the time, they kind of believed that if they were not... if their bodies were not buried properly, they would not be able to reach heaven. So for them, it was exactly what they did not want, to die in there. Today, the building, it's a student accommodation. It probably cost over £1,000 a month. But yeah, London is an expensive city to live. Now, do you remember, or do you care to guess? I mean, most of you have seen this tour before, but do we remember how many victims Jack the Ripper had? How many has he killed? Or have they killed, I should say? Because we don't know for sure that Jack the Ripper was a man, and we don't even know if it was only one person. It could have been a few. It could have been Jacqueline the Ripper. 5, says Jenny. Yeah, as far as we know, there's no strong evidence that Jack the Ripper was definitely a man. There is I say 6, yes, exactly, Laurie. 5, says Stars Hopper. Yes. So yeah, we don't know. It could be Jacqueline the Ripper. There is, well, actually, you know what? They did, at some point, they were trying to prove that Frederick Deeming, the Australian suspect, was the Ripper. And they did some DNA test on the back of the stamp of the Dear Boss letter. I think it was one of those letters we think could be real. the DNA on the back of the stamp was female. So, Jack the Ripper could have been a female. Well, actually, my favorite suspect, his DNA might be female. Yes, you've heard this right. His DNA could be female. But we'll get back to that at the end of the tour. I know some of you might be like, what? She's already told us about her favorite suspect. I'll tell you what I mean. Anyway, so yeah, most of you got it right, but I think most of you have seen this tour before. We think, or at least most, the truth is we don't know. We don't know who Jack the Ripper was. We don't know how many people they've killed. As simple as that. But in the autumn that year, there were a few murders. At the time, the Metropolitan Police would have been investigating 11 ladies' death. Most tripologists agree on 5. Laurie was saying, personally, I think it might be 6. Yes, there's a victim before the 5, Martha Tabram. I personally believe she was a Ripper victim as well. Although I'm not convinced that Elizabeth Stride was a victim of the Ripper. So it might be down to 5 anyway, adding Martha, removing Lizzie. But anyway, we'll probably get back to all that. So what really shocked public opinion that much, it's not really the number, it's the operating mode. So those ladies would have been killed in the dark at night, very quickly, often in less than 15 minutes. And their throat would have been slit first, and then they would have been ripped open, most of them, from the anus to the breast. And some of the organs were removed, mainly their uteruses. Now, you may have heard that Jack the Ripper was killing prostitutes. He probably was, but the truth is, out of those 5, 2 of them did sell their bodies at some point. It doesn't mean that they were necessarily soliciting that very night, but they had been selling their bodies. The 3 others, we don't know for sure. They probably were. Those ladies were homelesses. They probably every so often pleasure the men to have a night in a warm bed. So they might have been casual prostitutes, but we don't really have any evidence of that. At the time, the Metropolitan Police always imagined that any ladies out at night would have definitely been selling their bodies. They would call them infortunate. That was almost like a synonym for sex worker. The thing is, we don't know for sure. What we do know is the 5 of them were alcoholics. And the 5 of them would have drunk in that pub at some point or another. Mary Kelly, the last one, was drinking in there the night before she died. Now the pub is called the 10 Bells, after the bells in the church next door. And the pubs in England, they often have a name and a little illustration up there of the name. You see the little plaque with 10 bells. That is because back in the day, a lot of people did not know how to read and write. So if I gave you a meeting at the 10 Bells, we had pubs at pretty much every street corners at the time. So if you didn't know how to read, you'd have to check the illustration. And if you saw the plaque with 10 bells illustrated, you knew you were at the right place. Now, the 10 Bells pub, its connection with the Ripper murders was so strong that in the 70s they had renamed the pub the Jack the Ripper. Eventually, though, they swapped back to the 10 Bells because it didn't look very good to have a pub named after a serial killer. So they went back to the 10 Bells. Now, for many years, I had heard that when you go down to the toilets, if you looked in the mirror, you might, in the ladies' loo, you might see a reflection behind you, a tall lady wearing a green dress. Some say it might be the ghost of Lucky Lizzie. Lucky Lizzie, that's Elizabeth Stride, the 3rd victim. Now you might ask me, if she's a Jack the Ripper victim, why do we call her Lucky? Well, it's because Lucky Lizzie was the only one of the 5 that was not disemboweled. Her throat was slit, but the body was not mutilated any further. The organs remained. We believe, at least the most common theory, is that the killer was interrupted. He did not have time to do his weirdest fantasies, and he ran to the city of London, where he struck again with Catherine Eddowes. That's where we'll finish the tour. So that's the night of the double event. Now, I am sorry to let you know, if you go down to the toilets today, you're not gonna see Lucky Lizzie anymore. I've just been down today, and guess what? They changed the mirror. Some of you might remember, I've got a little selfie that I took myself in the mirror in COVID time. I'm wearing the COVID face mask on the picture. They used to have an old mercury mirror. So it makes it look a bit dirty. It's not a real mercury mirror, it's illegal. So you might see on this little shot of me, you might see some kind of a reflection behind me. Is it Lucky Lizzie? Is it any other ghost, or is it just the dirty fake mercury mirror? I don't know. What I do know is they've changed the mirror. So that now it's a nice, lovely, clean mirror with no fake mercury effect. So you're not going to have any drunken hallucinations. Well, you could. It's not going to be as easy to see a shape. So now if the ghosts want to appear, that'll be much harder for them. So yes, sadly, we won't see much more of Lizzie in the toilets. Now, before we go much further, let me show you the building across the street here. Back in the day, there's hardly anything to see today, but back in the day, across the street there, you had a little street called Dorset Street. Dorset Street was known to be the most dangerous street in London. A few years later, the police officers, apparently they refused to go down there unless it was 4 officers together. At the back of Dorset Street, there was a little place called Miller's Court. That's where Mary Jane Kelly, the 5th victim, used to live. So Mary Kelly was the only victim that was not homeless. She had a tiny little apartment. So she was also much younger than the others. Most of the other victims were in their 40s, late 40s. Mary Jane Kelly was in her 20s. And this is Christ Church of Spitalfield. Very sadly, at the time, the graveyard at night was full of homelesses sleeping rough, because the Metropolitan Police would not let people sleep on the pavement. So they'll be kicked away from the sidewalks. So the only places where they could sleep were graveyards or little courtyards. So yeah, that's a bit sad. But to come back to Mary Kelly, the crime scene was horrible. I have decided myself not to show you any photographs of the crime scenes through my tours. There are some on the internet. If you want to go and see, go by all means. But I thought if I was going to be murdered myself, I wouldn't really want any photos of my naked, disemboweled body to be exposed to virtual voyagers 135 years later. But I don't know what poultry we're talking about in the chat, guys. I might have missed the poultry. Sorry. The crime scene photograph. Luckily, it's in black and white, so it's not as graphic as it would be with the blood, but it's quite horrible anyway. She was on her bed. She had been brutally attacked. The Ripper had removed the organs. Her heart was never to be found. The other victims, their uteruses were gone. Why did Mary Kelly miss her heart? Some would say that it's because it might be her boyfriend that did it, because she was indeed a sex worker. Some said that someone was trying to intimidate her, scare her off of the job, and when she refused to stop selling her body, they took her heart. Who knows? A lot of people actually do believe that Mary Kelly was the final target. because she was the last one, and she was also, her profile was slightly different. Let me show you the door, it's quite fun. You've got number 11 and number 11 and a half. It is the actual address. If you want to send them a postcard, you have to write 11 and a half. It sounds a bit like Harry Potterish. Anyway, so yeah, Mary Kelly, she was, you couldn't even recognize the body. Her face was ravaged. Some would say it was the point. Some would say it was not even Mary Kelly that was found on that bed. There was an eyewitness, a friend of Kelly, that is adamant that she saw Kelly the next morning about 8 a.m. down the street when she was killed about 2 a.m. Could it be that it wasn't Kelly on that bed? I mean, who knows? Anything is possible, really. Now, let me show you the name of the street, Fournier Street. It sounds quite French, because it is. There are different waves of immigration that really shaped the area of Spitalfield, and the French Huguenots were the first. The Huguenots, they were the French Protestants. They had been very badly treated in France after the revocation of the agreements of Nantes. Long story short, but some of them left France. A lot of them came to London. They went everywhere. They went to Germany, they went to Canada, but a lot of them came to London. And a lot of them settled here in Spitalfield. A lot of them were in the weaving industry. That's why you see some tiny little windows on the top floor, because they wanted to use the daylight as much as they possibly could. And the next wave of immigration, let me show you the street name. The next wave of immigration were people from the Jewish community. In the 1880s, we had a lot of Jewish people coming from Russia and Eastern Europe. And the last wave of immigration, sorry, it's not focusing, there we go. That's people from the Bangladeshi community. So in the 60s, you had a lot of people coming from Bangladesh. You might see the name of the street up there. It's written in English as well as in the Bengali language. So that's quite cool. Let me zoom out. Oh, I think, just discovered that if I want the chat to stay a bit longer, I think if I touch the chat, it stays a bit longer. That's good to know. Although I'm trying not to touch the phone too much because I don't want to make the camera shaky, but that's good to know. Anyway, back to our murders. I'm taking you down to a little street. Little disclaimer, it's not where the murder actually happened. Polly Nichols, our second victim, was murdered at 29 Hanbury Street. But they've what happened is that the building has been destroyed. It doesn't look the same anymore. So I'm going to show you another building on the parallel street that would have looked fairly similar. This whole area still looks very much like it would have looked 135 years ago, apart from the new tarmac down the street and a few cars. But the buildings are pretty much the same. And there's one beautiful building here that looks even older. They purposely don't redo it, they don't renovate it, because they often use it for movies and stuff. Anyway, Annie Chapman was the second victim. Well, she was the second of the 5, but there were already a few murders before, so it was already a big deal in the press. She was the only one that was found when it was already daytime, because it was in September, so it was very bright already at 5:30 a.m. And she was found in a little courtyard. So those little doors, they lead into a little courtyard at the back. In a building like this, in Victorian times, you could have had up to 50 people living inside. I think 29 Hanbury Street was actually 17, but it could have been many, many more. Very sadly, those poor Victorians, they often lived all together, cramped into a tiny room. You had no space for privacy. Very often you could have one bedroom with a teenager cooking dinner next to a little brother taking a poo in a chamber pot, next to the parents making more babies. There was no privacy whatsoever. And the toilets would be in the courtyard, and no public sewer. So very often you had the night soilman. The night soilman was a guy that would come and collect the chamber pots, because they could use it as fertilizer, or with urine you can also do quite a lot. You could do some detergent or gunpowder, even with the ammonium in the urine. Anyway, the sex workers, as well as the homelesses, they would know that those little doors would have been left open all night. So did Annie go in there with a customer to do the job of a prostitute, or did she go in there to sleep? We don't know. There's a new theory that's been pushed by Hallie Rubenthal, the ripologist and historian. For many years, we believed those ladies were pleasuring a man as their job. Now there's a new theory that they might have killed during their sleep. That would make sense. That would explain why they didn't scream, because, you would attack them straight from sleeping. Anyway, there was an eyewitness that allegedly saw Annie on the street here. The guy would have said, "Will you?" And Annie said, "Yes." Personally, on the Jack the Ripper story, I don't give too much credit to the eyewitnesses, because very often they were prejudiced, they were anti-Semitist, and they would describe the guy as a foreigner and whatever. And also, in the middle of the night in Whitechapel, a lot of people were drunk, so I wouldn't trust them too much. And also, this lady had never met Annie. How does she know it's Annie? And also, it didn't match. The timing didn't match with another witness that went down to the toilets. Anyway, if indeed that witness, her name was Elizabeth Long, which is very interesting because our next victim, the third one, Lucky Lizzie, was also known as Long Liz. Could she have been targeted by mistake? Did they want to eliminate Elizabeth Long because she had seen the man? It's one of the many theories, maybe, who knows. Personally, I think Lucky Lizzie might have been killed by a different killer because of her life. She was a con artist, she had scammed a few people, and there were a lot of people that might have very good reasons to hate her. And also she was maybe killed with a different type of knives. But anyway, back to Annie Chapman. Annie, when her body was found, she was missing a few teeth, but that was to be expected. She had got into a fight a few days earlier. So when I describe those ladies to you, I love the windows over here. I don't want you to imagine them physically vulnerable. They were vulnerable. They would have been drunk and sick. Annie suffered from tuberculosis anyway. But those ladies were rough. They were drunk. They were fighting. They were ready to fight. To give you an idea, the lady with who Annie had been fighting, she'd been far more damaged than Annie was, and they were fighting over a bar of soap. So don't imagine them physically vulnerable. And Annie was Annie was homeless. It's not like if she could have left anything at home. So Annie was also missing 2 little rings, fake rings, no silver, nothing, just fake little rings, which was quite unusual because it's not like if she could have left them at home. She had no home. And we know now that serial killers, they often take a little trophy. Well, he had the uterus as well. But anyway, we are now arriving on the beautiful Brick Lane. So this is probably the most famous street in the area. This is a lovely place to come for a curry. It's lit up because I think it's for what is it called? Diwali Festival. Diwali? Well, anyway, the Asian Light Festival. Diwali, thank you, Tish. Anyway, Brick Lane. Did I tell you the last wave of immigration was people from Bangladesh? Technically, no. The last wave of immigration was the hipsters. The hipsters have really made this area their home as well. And it might not look very fancy, but it's actually a very expensive area to live. If you want a bedroom in a flat share, it's up to £2,000 a month over here, just for a bedroom to share the kitchen and the living room with strangers. Anyway, today it's fairly expensive, but back in Victorian times it was not. And let me show you this beautiful building. This is now a mosque. You might see the little minaret at the top. It is the only church in the country, as far as I know, that has done the three different Abrahamic religions. It was once a Huguenot church, so Protestant. Then it became a synagogue, and now it is mosque. So it kind of highlights the different waves of immigration in the area. And it is a listed building. It's protected because of its heritage. So inside, you still have some engravings in Hebrew. They're not allowed to remove them because it's listed. Anyway, back in 1888, this street would have been full of what they called dust houses. The dust houses, they were those accommodations for the very, very, very poor. Like a youth hostel today, but far worse. If you had 4 penny, to give you an idea, 4 pennies, that'll be like that'll be like the price of a pint of gin, or the price of the job of a sex worker in a dark corner. And that was also the price of a pint of gin, sadly. So for some of those ladies, it was a vicious cycle. You know, they'll get the 4 pennies, then they'll drink them away. But for 4 penny, you had a bed. Let me show you the bed. Hi, Mitzi, and welcome everyone that just joined. So that's the type of bed you'd get for 4 penny. It looks more like a coffin than the bed, really. If you did not have the 4 pennies, for 2 pennies, you could get the rope. So for 2 pennies, you could sleep on a rope. They would literally lay a rope from one side of the room to the next, and you'd sleep like this. I know it's hard to imagine that this would be better than the streets, but remember, down the street, you'd have wet floors, and you couldn't be on the street anyway. You'd have to be in a graveyard or in a courtyard. You might have rain and snow, so some people would sleep on the rope. Some say that it might be the origin of the term to be hangover, because you'd have your 4 pennies, so you'd have a pint of gin, and then you wouldn't have the money for a bed, so you'd end up sleeping on a rope, and the next morning you were hangover. I prefer, there's another explanation. Some people thought that hangover might be the day after the hangings, the public hangings that would happen until 1868. There was a bit of a party as well. You'd take a lot of alcohol with you, and the next morning you wouldn't feel very fresh. So who knows. Anyway, sadly for a lot of those ladies, that was like a vicious cycle. Whether they were selling their bodies or not, they could go begging, get the 4 penny, end up at the pub, drink the 4 pennies away, and then not have the money for the lodging house. That's exactly what happened to Polly Nichols. Polly Nichols, she was Marianne Nichols. She was the first of the 5 Ripper victims. She also had a tragic life. She was an alcoholic, and she had abandoned her family. The family was lucky, very lucky, to have a spot in a Peabody accommodation. That was one of the first social housing we had really in London. But you had to be a deserving poor to benefit from it. If they found out that you were an alcoholic, you'd be kicked out. So she probably abandoned her family because of that, because she didn't want, she was suffering from alcoholism already. Anyway, that's how she found herself on the street. She had taken a job into service for a while, but she stole the money. She stole the items of clothing, sold them, got some money. She did stay in a lodging house over here for a couple of weeks, but then she ran out of money. One night, she went to the pub. I'll show you the pub in a sec. And she drank her last money away. She didn't have money for the night, and she said to her mate, "Oh, I'm gonna go back to the lodging house." And the friend was like, "How are you gonna do, Polly? You've got no money." She went to the lodging house anyway. And the manager was like, no, Polly, you know the drill. No pay, no stay. And it's not that he was being mean or nasty in any way. The guy had a business to run, you know. It's not like if he could accept any drunken lady because he had some beds to fill, you know. So Polly famously said, "Don't worry, look at my jolly bonnet. I'll soon get my dust money." So this is the pub. It used to be called the Frying Pan. That's where she spent her last night. I'll show you the front. It's today it's not a girl pen. It's like a noodle bar. But I'll show you the top. It's quite typical of the Victorian pubs. You know, those little rounded corner with some kind of an engraving or masonry work. Anyway. So yeah, Polly said, "Don't worry, look at my jolly bonnet. I'll soon get my dust money." That very phrase has been used a lot to claim that she was definitely selling her body. She might have been. I don't know. I mean, even if she had been, that wouldn't change anything. You know, she's still a human. But we're not sure that's what she meant. She could have meant, "Look at my jolly bonnet. I'm gonna go and sell it." She could have meant, "Look at my jolly bonnet. I'm gonna go and beg, and because I'm cute, I'll get the money." We don't know. She never came back. She was found on Bucks Row. So when she was found, it was actually a worker on his way to work called Charles Cross. Although you might also know him as Charles Lechmere. He had lied to the police about his name. Cross was on his way to work when he, well, allegedly, spotted a pile of clothing, and he was like, yeah. Because at the time you could grab the items of clothing, you could sell them, you know, everything had a value, any piece of fabric had a value. And he got a bit closer, he realized it was not items of clothing, it was a lady. At first he believed it was a drunken lady. Flower on Dean Street was full of those dust houses. Anyway, he realized it was a lady, and then at that point, another chap came behind him, Robert Paul. So Cross turned around. He's like, "Oh, there's a dead lady here. I think she's dead. And Robert Paul came by him and was like, "Oh, let's sit her up." And Cross said, "No, I don't want to touch her." Now, at the time, Cross, the thing is, then they decided together to go and tell a police officer, but they continued on their way to work. They did tell a police officer, but by that point, another officer had discovered or rediscovered the body. Now, yes, exactly, Sarah. He's also a good suspect, a very good suspect, because he was on the scene of the crime. Maybe not my favorite, but, you know, now modern ripologists believe that when Robert Paul arrived, Cross was not in the process of finding the body, but in the process of killing her. It would make sense because he was very close to the body, and also they did not notice the blood quite yet. Maybe because she hadn't actually bled much yet, because she was literally just killed. The thing with the Jack Draper story is that you could read a new book or watch a new documentary where they'll ignore all the things that go against their narrative. There's one documentary about Lechmere somewhere that's very well done, but they do, there's some kind of an illustration of Cross kneeling right over the body. He wasn't that close to the body when the guy arrived. He was actually, he never was kneeling over her, so that could be a bit misleading. And if indeed he was the killer, when Robert Paul said, "Let's sit her up," why didn't he? Because if he did, he would have had an excuse to have maybe a bit of blood on himself, or you know. So who knows? He's a good suspect, but one of the many. And anyway, I didn't even tell you how we got the name Jack the Ripper. It's because of a letter. At the time, the press, the police, as well as the Whitechapel Vigilante Committee, that's a committee that was created to check the streets at night, they were receiving hundreds of letters most of them would have been hoaxes. There were letters from all across the country, not only London. You could have a lady, actually there was a lady in Wales, she was like, yeah, my neighbor is dodgy as fuck. They're probably Jack the Ripper. And then you'd have to, the police had to investigate, every single lead. Most of them are, if not all of them, were probably hoaxes. There's one that's maybe taken seriously. It's the Dear Boss letter, as well as the little package with half a kidney. So the Whitechapel Vigilante Committee received a parcel. So those letters were signed Jack the Ripper. So that's when the press picked it up, and the killer was named Jack the Ripper, and or dubbed Jack the Ripper, I should say. And that kidney, the thing is, at the time we had very little forensic. They were not even 100% sure that the kidney was human. But the press got it wrong, and the press published that the kidney was human and that it suffered from Bright's disease. So if the kidney was genuine, and it might have been, it would have come from the body of Catherine Eddowes, the fourth victim. That's where we're heading to now. And she did have some kidney problems. So it could be genuine. But the thing is, if it was a hoax, if it had been a kidney that was stolen by a student in medicine, it would have come from the bodies from the workhouses, and those ladies often suffered from kidney disease or liver disease, or it probably doesn't prove anything. And again, we don't know that. We have no clue whether the kidney was real or not. Now let me cross over. There we go. So yeah, that's how we got the name Jack the Ripper. But let me cross again while it's green. Oops, thank you. But we don't even know for sure that those ladies were indeed killed by the same killer. Actually, the only victim everyone agrees on, all the ripologists, it is Catherine Eddowes, the fourth one. So that's where we're heading to now. Now we are on the Petticoat Lane Market. The street used to be called Petticoat Lane, actually, but I think it's Queen Victoria that didn't like it. She thought it was a bit too sexy, so they've renamed it Wentworth Street. So that was at the time the street with a market. It still is. You could come to the Petticoat Lane Market. It's a lot of fabric being sold. Back in the day, though, in 1888, it was mainly Jewish traders. You had a lot of Jewish community living around here. And you might have heard the theory that Jack the Ripper himself was Jewish. I'll tell you why in a moment. We're going to the site of the famous non-clue. It is because, a large amount of the population around here was Jewish at the time anyway. To give you an idea, on Brick Lane at the time, there were 27 Jewish tailors. So a large chunk of the population was Jewish anyway. But there's one suspect that I have to mention today because he's one of the top three, really. He's not my favorite, but he was indeed Jewish and he ticks all the boxes. It is Aaron Kosminski. Kosminski was he was a lunatic, as they would have said at the time. He was addicted to masturbation. He had assaulted his own sister, and he was locked up in an asylum. We often think that the serial killers, they usually go crescendo and crescendo, so they don't stop. They usually stop if they're locked up in an asylum, in a prison, or if they move away, or if they die. So, and when I say Aaron Kosminski, we don't even know whether we're talking about the right guy. There was indeed an Aaron Kosminski that was taken into an asylum, but the police officers seem to have mentioned a Jewish suspect that died in an asylum, but Kosminski actually died many years later. There was another one that was Nathan Kaczynski, that was also what they would have called a lunatic, and he actually did die in an asylum. And there was another one that was also a Jewish suspect that died in an asylum. It's Jacob Levy. So we don't even know whether I say suspect. We probably wouldn't even say suspect back then, because clearly he wasn't a good suspect. Otherwise, the police would have been watching him. He would have been, maybe today we'll call him a person of interest. But clearly the police at the time didn't believe Kosminski had done it, because otherwise they would have been aware that he didn't die in the asylum for another 15 years, you know. But yeah, Kosminski ticks all the boxes. He was indeed Jewish. He was indeed suffering from mental health issues. He was indeed with some weird sexual tendencies, and he did go into an asylum. But apart from that, there's nothing stronger against him, really. Now, let's go down Goulston Street here. I'll show you why some people have speculated that Jack the Ripper was Jewish. It is because shortly after finding Catherine Eddowes, the fourth victim, they found by the door here, so the building to my left over here, that's Wendroth model dwellings. It's a building where pretty much everyone in 1888 was Jewish. And they found by the little door here a piece of apron. You know, at the time, ladies would often have an apron over their skirts. And they found a piece of Catherine Eddowes' apron right by the door here. It was definitely part of her apron. It was cut off. There was actually a bit of stitching that went across because she had fixed it herself. You know, she probably had it ripped off at some point. And it was full of blood and feces. Now, on top of the apron, there was a little graffito that was written on a black wall with chalk. It read, "The Jews," well, it's spelled Jewess, "won't be the men to be blamed for nothing." Well, we don't even know whether it said that for sure, because what happened is the Metropolitan Police did not want to raise up the anti-Semitism. A couple of hours later, everyone would wake up to go to the market. They did not want the Jewish community to see that. So the Metropolitan Police erased the graffito. I say graffito because graffiti, it's plural. So the police erased it before the city police could take a photo. Because the city police was now involved, because Catherine was found in the city of London. Now, if you ask me, I think it might be a coincidence. If you ask me, I don't know whether a killer running away from a murder scene might take the time to write a graffito. There might have been quite a few anti-Semitist graffitis in the area anyway. And just to show you how much we know nothing, we've always assumed that this piece of bloody apron was dropped by the killer. How do we know that? Do we? We don't. Actually, there's a ripologist that would argue that it might have been a rat that picked it up and dropped it there from the crime scene. It's possible. Today, it might even be a fox. I don't think they had as many foxes in Victorian times as we do today. But today, a fox would definitely do that. Foxes, they take a lot of shoes. I don't know if you've never noticed on the streets of London, or in the parks or anywhere across London, sometimes you see a shoe, a single shoe. And sometimes they're good shoes. You know, it might be like brand new Nike shoes. And you think to yourself, how on earth would anyone lose a single shoe here and not realize they've lost their shoe? I mean, it took me years to realize why we've got those random shoes all across London. It's actually the foxes. Foxes love to grab shoes. So it's not that people have lost a shoe. They've put their shoes in their porch, you know, or by their door somewhere. And at night, the foxes come and they grab the shoes. You know, I do a lot of cycling at night. And like, for example, tonight, you know, I'm going to cycle home. So I'll probably see a few foxy friends. And sometimes when you see a foxy friend, they've got something in their mouth and you're like, hey, what did you catch? Is it a rat? And then you see they're actually carrying a shoe. So do not leave your shoes in your porch or by your door if you live in London, because the foxes would take them. So it is completely possible that an animal would have taken the piece of apron from the crime scene and taken it here. Or the same ripologist also argued that Catherine might have dropped it herself. She might actually have cut it off herself and used it as a sanitary pad and disregarded it there. So, the main theory, and I think it's the more plausible theory, it's that the killer took it from the crime scene, maybe to carry the kidney and the uterus he was carrying, or maybe just to clean his knife. But even that, we don't know. We really know very little. Sometimes when you go back to what we really know, we know nothing, really. Most of what we do about the Ripper story is pure speculation. Anyway, let me show you some graffitis. We were talking about rats. Well, this is a big rat from artist Roa over there. And this is one of the oldest pieces of graffiti I know in this area. This has been here for at least 8 years now. The average lifespan on a piece of street art in London is actually 3 months. And this one here, that's not my favorite. That's fairly new. It's been here for 6 months now. Your tour guide is lying to you. To be fair, it is actually true. I mean, with the tour guides, with the Jack the Ripper tour guides, a lot of us, even myself, I'm not one to go back to go to the archives or to go to. I'm probably a bit loud. They're doing some filming here. We're not going to stay too long. But I'm not one to go back down to the archives or to go to the police records. I just follow books or documentaries or ripologists I might follow on whatever platform. So, everything we say, really, and even some of the documentaries, sometimes they're lying. I mean, there was a documentary about Kosminski on the BBC a few years ago, and even then they were lying. Not straight, big, fat lies, but, just arranging the truth to fit their narrative and their suspect. So, yeah, everyone is lying. Anyway, let me cross over to show you where we are now. Oh, we were talking very quickly about Jacob Levy earlier. Levy, he actually is a fairly good suspect as well. He lived on that side. Well, he actually lived on both sides of the street. He's moved. But Jacob Levy was a butcher. He was also taken into an asylum. We are very close to the fourth murder, and we're very close to the Wendros dwellings where we think the Ripper went through with his piece of apron. We're now back in the city of London. When you see those little stars on white background, it's the city of London. I'll show you the little crest again up there. So you see the little crest again. So we're back in the city. So now we're on the patch of the city police. But yeah, Levy, he's been in the. He's not a fairly new suspect, but there was a book a few years ago called Jacob the Ripper, where they claimed that Levy was the Ripper. He might have been. I mean, he does tick all the boxes as well, but we've got to be careful because the Ripper story really it tarnished the reputation of many innocent men. Levy was according to many profilers, he's got everything you need. He's a very local man, because whatever profiler you listen to, whether it's the FBI, because they did do a profiling as well, or they all agree that the Jack the Ripper, whoever they were, would know the East End like the back of their hands. They would be very local. And so Levy had grown up in those streets. He had a butcher shop right here. The fact he had a butcher shop as well, he would have been able to come back to the shop, wash his hands, maybe even store the uteruses away. No one would question a piece of meat in his shop, He was taken into an asylum as well, so that would explain why the murder stopped. His wife said that he was often, walking the streets for absolutely no reasons and stuff. But his wife, she died many, many years later. On her grave, she has written, "Dear wife of Jacob." I mean, clearly she didn't believe he was the Ripper. So, there are many innocent people. And we're not sure that mental health issues would be a good thing. Those murders look more like well-calculated psychopath. people with mental health issues, they make mistakes. They get caught, you know. So anyway, he's one of the many suspects, but not my top one either. Now, there's one suspect I have to mention. The story is completely bonkers, but I need to tell you because it's a crispy story. It is the royal conspiracy. So the royal conspiracy rests on Prince Eddie. Eddie was the grandson of Queen Victoria, and he was the firstborn. So in the line of succession, we're talking about like Prince George today. So he would have been the heir to the throne. Prince Eddie, his name was actually Victor Albert, because when they access the throne, they choose their names. It doesn't have to be their first names. Even Queen Victoria, she had some doubts about his intellect. He never became king because he died quite young of influenza epidemic. That's how his little brother, George V, came to the throne. Anyway, Eddie was said to like the prostitutes. There were some very luxurious prostitutes in Westminster, but no, he was said to like the one from Whitechapel, you know, the one missing teeth and stuff. There's no evidence of any of that, by the way. And it is said that he might have fallen in love with one of them. And she might have fallen pregnant. And they might have secretly married. Now, some claim that the baby was born and that Queen Victoria heard of it. Some say that Mary Kelly was actually blackmailing the royal family because she knew about the royal baby. And that then Queen Victoria would have asked a physician, Sir William Gull, to eliminate those 4 prostitutes that were aware of the royal baby. I said 4, not 5. I'll tell you why in a moment. It is a crispy story. You know, we all like a good royal conspiracy. But the thing is, Sir William Gull at that point, I think he was 78 years of age. He had had a stroke. Would he have had the physical strength to kill ladies like Annie Chapman that were ready for a fight? I doubt it. And the other theory, it's that it might be Prince Eddie himself that would have suffered from syphilis. You know, syphilis goes with different stages. When you're young, you're very irritated and contagious. Then you have a few years with nothing, no symptoms, and then it starts to attack your brain, and you can get what they would have called at the time mad. So the story of the syphilis retribution, it's very common with many suspects as well. So the theory is that Eddie might have been in need of revenge on the sex workers that would have contaminated him years before. Well, Prince Eddie, he's got an alibi anyway. One of the murders, he was in Balmoral having dinner with Queen Victoria. Well, Levy, the one we just mentioned, it's the same. He would have contracted syphilis years ago, and it's always the same story. Even with my favorite suspect, there's a story that he might have contracted syphilis. And to be completely fair, a good 20% of the population had syphilis at the time. So, but yeah, we've used that syphilis story quite a lot with different persons of interest. Now, that was for the royal conspiracy. The royal conspiracy, you might have seen it illustrated in the From Hell movie with Johnny Depp. It's a good story. I mean, I love the movie. Is it believable? Honestly, no, not really. There's no evidence of any of that. And Eddie, he was gay anyway. I mean, he was caught in a gay brothel in Soho, the Cleveland Street scandal. I mean, he might have been bisexual, but yeah, it's an interesting story. Not my favorite. Now, let me tell you about my favorite victim, Catherine Eddowes. Eddowes, I like her because, well, she was a bad mother. She was an alcoholic as well. She had abandoned her kids as well. But I like her because for me she's almost like a Victorian stand-up comedian. What she used to do is she used to follow the public executions with her boyfriend. You know, until 1868, you had public executions. So she would go from town to town or village to village to follow those executions. What she'd do, because she knew how to write, she would write little poetry. They often did that, pretending to be like the last words of the criminal, the person being executed. And then she'd be reading out the poetry out loud on the streets the day of the hangings, and selling little chapbooks. She was an alcoholic, sadly. She didn't speak to her kids anymore. They didn't want to see her anymore. The church, by the way, this is St. Botolph without Holgate. At the time, in Victorian times, it was known as the prostitute church, because, well, prostitution was of course illegal, but everyone knew it was going to happen anyway. So the authorities, as well as the police, they kind of agreed that the prostitutes would have to they would have to not do two things. They would have to make sure they didn't loiter, they had to keep moving, and they would have to make sure they didn't solicit. So very often, apparently at night, you had hundreds of sex workers that would come and walk around in circle here around the church. So gentlemen would know, well, gentlemen, guys, men, I don't know whether I could call them gentlemen, but they would know where to find them, and they could keep moving. They didn't loiter. Now, was Eddowes there walking around the church? We don't know. What we do know is that she had been down to Kent to go hop picking. You know, in September that was the season, but it was a bad season that year. There was not much to collect. So with her boyfriend, she had walked back all the way to London. They were penniless, the both of them. So they actually decided to split. She told him, "You go and sell your shoes, and you find yourself a dust house for the night. I'm gonna go down to Bermondsey to beg my daughter for money." She could not possibly have done that. Her daughter did live in Bermondsey, but she had not given her a new address. She didn't want to see her mum, you see, because her mother was troubled. What we do know is that a few hours later, Catherine was found not far from here, on the floor, pissed drunk. She was making animals noises on the floor. We've all been there, right? So she was taken to Bishopgate police station, and she was asked to checking in. She was like, "What's your name?" She said, "Nothing." So they put Nothing into a cell where she slept for a couple of hours, and then she woke up and she was being annoying. She was like singing some Irish songs, and she was shouting, "When are you gonna let me go?" And eventually the police had enough. The police said to her, "We'll let you go when you can take care of yourself." She said, "I can do that right now, you old cock." And they were like, "Okay, we'll let you go if you give us your name and address." Now, her name was Catherine Eddowes, and she had no address. She was homeless, sadly. But she said to them, "I am Mary Ann Kelly, and I live 6 Fashion Street." And then they let her go. She was freed after midnight. There was no way she was actually sober. When at 8 p.m. you're on the street making animal noises, you can imagine 4 hours later you're not sober, you know. But they let her go. And not far after that, at 1:30 a.m., PC Edmund Hawkins came down here. We are now on the famous Mercer Square. The geography of the site has not changed too much. The buildings are new, of course, but the geography is pretty much the same. At the time, you had a lot of warehouses around here, because we are quite close to the St. Catherine's docks. So that required a lot of police officers, because some of the goods that were stored in the warehouses were quite expensive. You know, tea, tobacco. St. Catherine's Dock was especially known for pricey goods. So the police had to come, and they would come. They'd follow their beat every 15 minutes. So PC Edmund Watkins come down here. You would have to imagine the streets being very, very dark at the time. Today, we've got lights everywhere, but at the time, that was very dark. So he'd be walking down here with his lantern. He came down this way. Nothing out of the ordinary. And he went down that side. So that's 1:30. 1:35, there's an eyewitness. For the little story, the eyewitness was a cousin of Jacob Levy. There's a theory that the guy did not want to recognize his own cousin Levy because, you know, it's all, I don't buy it, but yeah. Anyway, the witness allegedly saw Catherine down there talking to a man, and that's it. 1:35. 1:45, PC Edmund Watkins come back. So the same police officer comes back with his lantern again. When he spots what he believes to be a drunken lady on the floor, he gets a bit closer. She's not drunk, she's dead. That was the body of Catherine Eddowes. Eddowes is the only one that has a little plaque. The body had been mutilated quite severely. She had been ripped open as well. Her uterus was gone as well as a kidney. And he had cut off little squares, a little triangle on her cheek, and the nose was gone as well. Now, remember that's the night of the double event. So that's about 40 minutes after Elizabeth's tried. So if we believe it's indeed the same killer, the killer was raging because he did not have the opportunity to do whatever he wanted to do to Lizzie. So he came here and did his weird fantasies. In less than 15 minutes, or even less than 10, if you believe the eyewitness, in the dark. So that's why people believed that Jack the Ripper had some kind of anatomical knowledge, that he might have been a surgeon, a doctor, or he might have been a butcher. The anatomy of a pig is not that different of the anatomy of a human. So Levy was a butcher. Or he might even be a barber. Barber surgeons at the time, the barbers at the time, they would do mini surgeries. If you had a verruca to cut off, you'd go to the barber. If you had a teeth to pull away, you'd go to the barber. So they would also have some anatomical knowledge. Kosminski was a barber. Well, Severin Klosowski was also a barber, but we don't have time to talk about Klosowski today. It's George Chapman. We did a full live stream about Chapman. So he's also a good suspect. Let me show you the gherkin over here. So yeah, Eddowes would have been done in the dark in less than 10 minutes. So he had time to do a fairly clean cut to remove the kidney as well as the uterus. But I think we do give him a lot of credit. We don't even know whether he wanted the kidney and the uterus. What if he wanted two kidneys and got a uterus by mistake? We don't even know that. We know nothing really. But anyway, poor Catherine, that's where she was found. Now, time to tell you about my favorite suspect. And I know I've just dropped a bombshell earlier telling you it might not have been a man, so I need to explain myself. I think a lot of you in the chat already know who my favorite suspect is. It is an American doctor called Francis Tumblety. Let me show you his face. There is Tumblety. Tumblety was known as the Great American Doctor. He was from, he was actually born in Ireland, but he had immigrated to America. And he was a quack. We know he was a murderer. He had actually killed people in Liverpool. At least one for sure. One guy that came to, he would come to a city in the UK, and then he would post in the newspaper, "The Great American Doctor is here with the best knowledge whatsoever," and blah blah blah. And then he would sell some bad medicines, pretending it came from Native Americans, and he did kill a couple of people in Liverpool. He didn't go down for murder because they couldn't prove it was the medicine that did it. But yeah, the police was already looking into him, and he got Well, you know what? He's actually the only one of the big suspects that was questioned by the police in relation to the murders. They didn't have enough to charge him. He was actually charged for gross indecency with 5 guys. We are talking about homosexuality. But he was released very probably just before the Mary Kelly murder. That could explain why he was raging. And then because he knew he was in trouble because of the Jack the Ripper murders, he escaped. He escaped to France under a fake name. He went under the name of Frank from now on. And then from France he went back to Rochester, where he was from, Rochester, New York. That's where he's buried. Some of my followers have been to see the grave. The reason why is my favorite suspect. It's that, well, first, he was in Whitechapel, we know that. He was a pervert, we know that. He was, even in Rochester, he was selling some pornography. Well, Victorian pornography. I don't really want to know what it looks like, to be honest. And some of the profilers, they would tell you it's very unlikely that, they would tell you it's very, very unlikely that a gay serial killer would target ladies. Yes, that is if you consider that Tumblety was indeed a man. I don't want to go too far deep down this theory because I think it might not be true. It might just be the Victorian press that was a bit homophobic and stuff. But there were some reports in the American press that Tumblety might have been intersex. Well, what they would have called at the time hermaphrodite. There were some reports that he had a mini penis. We know it's often the case with serial killers. They often suffer from some erectile dysfunction and some stuff. So yeah, he definitely gendered himself as a man. I mean, he lived his life as a man, but there are some reports that he might have been born somewhere in between. And let me show you his picture again because, hold on, I'm gonna sorry, my fingers are a bit frozen, but I want to zoom in on his face so you can make up your mind. The mustache is actually fake. So imagine without the big, he had a huge mustache, but it's actually, well, we don't know about that one. He might have had a real mustache at some times, but apparently the caretaker, when he died in Rochester, the mustache just popped out of the body. So you can see, you know, he was very effeminated. That's a fact. That we do know. And if indeed he wasn't really a man, then it would have been even more infuriating to be going down charged for gross indecency, because and he could have been infuriated. He could have been against ladies because they would have the right to sleep with men. There were some horrible sex workers. He actually hated ladies. That he made very clear with his friends. So, you know, sorry, whether he was intersex or not, I don't know. We'll never really know. The reason why he's my favorite suspect is that, well, first, he's the only one that was really. The police tried to extradite him from the U.S., but the U.S. said no. So the police did have something against him at the time in terms of the Ripper murder, so they did suspect him. Why, we don't know, but, you know. Also, we know he doesn't care about human life. He's killed some people in Liverpool with his bad medicines. We know he suffers from some type of erectile dysfunction. That's also a big sign. But the little details that makes me think, there was an American doctor that contacted the School of Medicine in Smithfield, asking them if they could buy uteruses. That was before the murders. He allegedly offered them £20. That was a large amount of money at the time. The School of Medicine said no. that would also explain why someone else would want to steal some uteruses. Even if he wasn't the killer himself, someone else might be the killer, and they might have wanted to get some uteruses for the American doctor. Anyway, later on, when he died, some of his mates claimed that they had been invited for a dinner at his place. You know, doctors as well, and this type of people from high society. And he had very proudly showed them a collection of uterus into little jars of glycerine. And he very proudly said, oh, this is a collection of uteri from ladies from all classes of society. I've got some working class, I've got some upper class uteri. What you need to know is that was before, about 10 years before the Ripper murders. So even if he did take the uterus in Annie Chapman and Catherine Eddowes and stuff, those uteruses couldn't be those ones because that was 10 years before. But he did have a great interest in uteruses. And the last little nail on the coffin, for me at least, it's that when he died in I think 1903 in Rochester, he was very rich. He had a lot of money. And they found in his possession 2 little rings, fake, like or identical to the ones missing on Annie Chapman's body. And we know now that serial killers, they like their little trophies, you know. So I think he's a very good suspect. We'll never have enough to prove it, but I think he's a good one. And or they are a good one, I guess. I don't want to gender them when we don't know. You like my theory? Good to know. Cool, guys, this is gonna be the end of the tour. Let me know in the chat if you have any questions about anything before we go. If not, thank you very much for coming today. It's always a pleasure to have so many of you along with me. If you want to see a bit more of me, next week we've got Guy Fawkes. So that's going to be, of course, on the 5th of November, Guy Fawkes night. Thank you, guys. If any of you were completely new to me, if you've made it that far down into the live, make sure you subscribe. If you want to make sure you don't miss out on the fun next time, make sure you give me a sub and you hit the little notification bell, because those lives, they're very easy to miss. Of course, you can watch the replay later, but it's more fun to be live with us in the chat. And thank you, Laurie. Thanks, Patricia. Thanks, Marilyn. Thanks, everyone, for coming tonight. Oh, thanks, Pauline. That's very, very nice of you. And I can see the dancing lemon. If any of you dropped me a little tip on buy me a coffee or PayPal, that's very much appreciated as well. I don't see them live. I'll see them when I close the system, but that's very much appreciated as well. It's really, I rely on the vast majority of the money I get, it's from your tips. So I completely rely on your tips to keep going with those tours and do some new ones as well, and do some new research and take you to exciting places. So if any of you dropped me a tip on PayPal or buy me a coffee, that's very, very much appreciated as well. Cool. Thank you, guys. Thank you for coming. Hopefully I'll see you next week. So I actually have 2 next week. I've got the 5th of November, but on the 7th, I'm taking you to Budapest. I'm going to the dentist in Budapest again. So we'll have a live walk in the evening where I'll tell you about some interesting murders in Hungary and Budapest as well, because they had their share lot of murderers as well. And thank you, Diane. That's very, very much appreciated. Cool. I don't see any questions, so I'm gonna get going. When am I going? I'm going the day before, so I'm flying on the 6th. I'm spending only 1 day in Budapest because I've been many times. So I'm just going to the dentist, then the tour. And the next morning, I'm going down to Slovenia for 2.5 days. Because I didn't want to do only Budapest because I've been there so many times. So I'm actually gonna go to Slovenia. I'll go to Lake Bled and stuff. I won't be doing a live in Slovenia, but I'll be doing some videos. So I'll be able to show you that when I get back a couple of days later. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much. Have a great evening or a great morning or whatever time it is for you, wherever you are in the world. And have a great Halloween as well. I hope you have fun, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. I need to find the button. It's all different from Prism. Oh, there it is. Bye-bye.